So today I got a package in the mail. It was another mega dungeon. This time it's called the Halls of Arden Vul. I was originally planning to make some videos on this channel chronologically, but then I just noticed that there are actually a lot of videos about the older well-known mega dungeons, such as the Temple of Elemental Evil. I didn't see any videos on this one yet, so I thought I'd make one. Maybe some people are interested in seeing my first impressions on this product. So this is actually the most expensive RPG product that I've ever bought. This costed me $255 for the hardcover version, and also you get the PDFs with those. So this is actually not just one book. It is a total of 5 volumes. I kind of like the format of putting a mega dungeon in multiple books, especially for this one. It's quite big, and they have kind of given a little thought about how to divide this. So the 5th book is just maps. The 4th book is just the appendices. So this is all the new items, new monsters, and all kinds of other information. The first 3 are actual description of rooms and the area around the dungeon. So when we start with the first book, we have some nice art. A forward. This is, by the way, by a single author, Richard Barton, and I think it's probably the biggest RPG product that I've ever seen by a single author. So the price, $255 is actually, I think, even for these 5 books, it is quite a bit of money. For that amount of money you can get all kinds of awesome stuff. You can get Rapanatuk and the Slumbering Tsar. You can get 2 full adventure paths for Paizo Pathfinder. You can get, for example, Ptolus and the Zeitgeist Adventure Path. Basically, it's a lot of money, and as you can see here, you also get a lot of stuff for that money. So here you can see how the 4 first books are divided. The first book is basically everything outside, and then the first 4 levels. The second book has the last 6 levels, so level 5 to 10, and then the third book has all the sub levels, which are not the main levels, but they are still quite large areas. I'll show you some maps soon after. And then book 4 is the appendices, so new monsters, magical items, special flora, spells, books, which is really cool. All the NPCs, complete NPC parties and stuff like that. It's really a big product. They say it's over 1100 pages. So you have basic history of the location, some information about starting levels and for areas. So here already you can see in this little table everything is pretty much accessible from the start, from the outside area, and from some other. So you can see here, he suggests that an adventuring party of level 1 should start at level 3, which is accessible through the Pyramid of Thought. And the levels above, For example, level 1 is actually meant for people who are new to this experience, the old school experience. It's a starter level for players that are new to the pleasures of old school gaming, in the words of the author. So there's a couple of entry points, and there's a number of suggested experience levels for these. All the areas below this, such as level 6 through 10, they're all meant for higher levels, as well as some of the sub-levels. There are a couple of different architectural styles, which are detailed here. So what kind of doors do they use, what is the stonework they use, and it also has a list of the locations which have this particular architectural styles. The next part is about basically rumors. So there's a couple of iconic areas in the dungeon, which are divided by common, uncommon, rare, and esoteric types. So basically knowledge. So how many people know about this? For each of these, you can roll either on one of these. So esoteric is more rare if you use the D20 table, or you have here an equal chance for every one of these specific locations in the dungeon. And then there's a little section called the scuttlebutt, which is basically the rumor, and then there's the veracity, which describes how accurate it is and what it actually relates to. Past these rumors, there's actually two more very large rumor tables. Each is a D100 table, so there's 100 rumors based on adventuring rumors. For example, a psychotic halfling thug named Plummet or Plum something has taken over the top level just under the pyramid. He won't let anyone pass unless they buy an exploration license. And apparently this is true. There's also a table with 100 historical rumors, such as the Pyramid of Thoth in the Rune City leads directly to the topmost of many underground levels. This is false. Beneath it are a dozen other levels, culminating in a huge cavern lake at the bottom, which is true. As I described in my other video, one of the things that a mega dungeon needs are factions, and this particular mega dungeon has some of the best factions and faction play that I've actually seen. So this is my first impression video. I've just got the product in today. When I ordered it, I kind of glanced over the PDF files, and today I did some leafing through the different tomes. So I'm not completely familiar with it. I wouldn't say this is a complete review. Maybe I'll do a review at a later date. So there's more than 10 different factions, and then it describes here for each faction relates to another faction, if they know about them and if they like them or not, basically. Maybe they even fear them. And then for each faction, for example here the Beastmen, it describes the ruler, the resources they have, faction size, replacements, attitude towards adventurers, the areas they have under their control, motives, goals and quests, possible expansions and contractions. And that is actually described for all factions. Right here, we're already over 50 pages in, and then there's some hooks, adventure hooks, basically hooks to get your adventurers, your heroes towards the dungeon. Basically quests. So there's a couple of quests here, and it describes the area where which are relevant for this particular hook, the source of the hook, and an explanation for the hooks. There's quite a few of those, and then there are two that are further detailed. So there's rescue operation as a possible hook, and there's a complete list of all captives in the dungeon. And here describes who. Here describes basically which interested party might be interested in getting that particular captive back from the dungeon. The whole list of captives. And then there's the oldest profession, tomb robbing 101. Location of all the tombs in the dungeon, along with the guardians and the amount of treasure, and if the tomb is trapped or not. So you can see almost 3 pages, just a list of the tombs available. There's a little section here, it's not that big, about possible ways of customizing or expanding the dungeon. I think it's big enough to not really need any expansion. This list is interesting. This is the list which shows external locations such as the Abyss or the City of Brass, maybe a cave in a snowy mountain many miles north, and where there is a location of the portal or the gate that will send you there. Now this product is I think what is referred to as Gonzo. I'm not a native English speaker. I'm not sure what the root or the source or the actual meaning of this word is. This is a mix of sci-fi and fantasy. Basically most of the dungeons is just classic fantasy, like dungeon delving, but there are some sci-fi influences here. If you don't like sci-fi influence in your dungeons, you might not like this one that much. I wouldn't say it's as silly as something like the anomalous subterranean whatever dungeon, but it's kind of a twist like the Expedition to Barrier Peaks classic dungeon. So after that, finally we get to a description of the places. There is a map, so I'll get the map book and show you some of these maps. So these maps are all actually too big to really fit on a single page in a book like this. So what they did, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, is they have here, for example, I will go a bit further. For example, they have here the player map. And then it's divided in 9 sections. These 9 sections are then displayed on the next 9 pages. So this is the basic area around the dungeon. So you can see here Arden Vul is located over there, and there is actually a city called Gostervik, or the Azure Keep, right close by it. The basic idea is this is a giant cliff, and there's a waterfall that runs down here, down the cliffs, and it flows past this location. This location, Gostervik, or the Azure Keep / the Azure Keep, is the basic town for dungeon exploration. Here you can see those pages, and for example on this one it kind of works, like these are located next to each other, section 4 and 5, and you get a nice little big map. But for this it doesn't quite work because there's not much information in this part, I think, and having the what's it called, the legend down there, I don't think it works that well. But it's just too big to display in a normal fashion. So this book has some waste pages. Now we have here the Azure Keep and Gostervik, which is, as I said, the main starting town, basically the town where all the services and stuff are. This is a quite sizable town, has an interesting backstory with the leader. There are about 30-ish locations here that the players can check out. And some more wasted pages, I feel. Now, if you look north from this town, you will see the cliff. And the cliff face basically looks something like this. Not sure if I can actually, how it actually shows in the camera. So, if you look north from the city, you have this giant cliff face. On top of the cliff, there is the city of Arden Vul, and in the cliff there are two giant statues. I believe they're called the Colossi, and there's a stair that goes all the way to the top, and there's a stair that's very broken halfway, has some gaps, and there's a waterfall. Some locations here. I will read some default or some basically random entries from the books after I've shown some more of these maps. So again, you have a bit bigger version of those maps, and then you have here, it's quite light, so this is the overall map that you would probably find very useful. Now this comes, as I said, with PDFs, and in those PDFs you have very usable maps which you can scroll, which really helps. But here in book form you cannot really scroll, so this is a solution that works kind of. You can see the zoomed out map is quite light. It's not, I don't think, for example, this one is very useful. The dungeon ones are more useful because they have more contrast, but the zoomed in version is actually quite nice. Now so another example, depending on the pages land, it works or it doesn't. So this works. This is location west, this is location east. However, here, because there was still a little bit to the east of that, you have this, and then the next one is a page over. So that can be frustrating, I guess. There's a lot of maps in this product, so I'll go through this quickly. Lots of little sub-dungeons. This is the cross-section, which every good dungeon needs. This one reminds me a lot of the Castle White Rock subsection, which is good, I guess. People really love that one. Here you can see, and here in a bit more detail, zoomed in, where each level is located. And there are some interesting stuff, such as if you check level 4, it will go all the way up, so, and it actually crosses level 3 halfway, or level 5, I guess. So there's some interesting stuff like that. There's canyon, and there's the waterfall. So a big cave actually is on pretty much all the lower levels. This is level 1, which fits. This is very classic, very tiny little dungeon level, but they get much crazier. So level 2 is already a lot bigger, taking up 6 of these pages, and you can see quite a nice map. Level 3 then is where the real crazy starts. You get these giant maps. And I think something like level 4, it doesn't even fit anymore on one of these pages. So this actually is the whole dungeon spread over 2 pages. Well, you can see 3, 4, 3, 4. So it doesn't fit quite, but it's not that much here after. I think something like Barrow Maze, probably as big as one of these levels, one like level 4. This reminds me a lot of how the Barrow Maze map is actually displayed at the end of the Barrow Maze volume. So yeah, they're really nice maps. So I would say, if you just like maps, get book 5. If you want the rest of the dungeons, get book 1, 2 and 3. And if you actually want to run this, or you're interested in the new spells, monsters and stuff, then you will also need book 4, the appendices. well, there's another big collection of pages for just all the sub-levels. So there's more than 200 pages of maps, and I would say only about a third of those are probably wasted. So I won't show anything from the book 2 or 3. I maybe leave a bit through book 4 to show you some of the appendices, but well, let's look at some entries. So this is the Burdock's Valley, which is the first map I showed, the big map with both the halls of Arden Vul and this little town and some other areas, and then it lists, for example, some of the towns, the villages, fortifications, adventuring sites. There's a couple of factions. For example, the Knights of the Azure Shield are located from the Azure Keep, and then we have AK1, which is Azure Keep. The map of Azure Keep detailed all those locations for the starting town. So if you compare the number of pages they spent on all the things, then the valley itself is just a few pages. There's no real key entries here. It's just some tiny little sections and some suggestions. So you'll need to work those out if you really want to do adventures outside of the dungeon in the valley. But the other sections are actually quite detailed and pretty cool. So the Azure Keep, every location here lists some of the really interesting things. So there's a standard key which describes who is there, what are they doing, and it also has a little surface and personality section which shows which services you can get in this particular location and who is there and what is their personality. So you can, as a DM, just get a quick glance. Maybe able to see, I'm not sure if the camera picks up this amount of detail, this level of detail, but for every entry, for example here, the 2 ranking big brothers are Risa the Hammer, AK4, whose crew specializes in protection and extortion, and Anders the Snake, AK5, which crew contains the best second story men and women. So AK4 and 5, basically what this does, also in the other books, a lot of the people that are described, NPCs, some items, they have a little reference in parentheses just after this, and those refer to other locations or other levels in the dungeon. It can work. It's quite interesting. So this is actually the first area with some random encounter tables. So this is the big exterior shot. So if you look north, you see this giant cliff face, and they're describing the falls, as they describe it, the long stair. In these the next few pages, this is the exterior, they call it the AEX area. Now there's a daytime and a nighttime encounter table for outside, and it will list, for example, these are Beastmen patrols. So the Beastmen is one of the factions in the dungeon. There's a mountain lion, and it lists it comes from EX 14, cavemen from EX 5. So all these locations are described, and this is actually the first adventuring location. And once you take those stairs all the way to the top, you'll come to the Rune City itself. And this is where the product gets really interesting for me. So basically the eastern section of the city is ruins with buildings and stuff where the actual pyramid is, and the western side of the old Rune City is more like wilderness. So they have split these tables into the western and the eastern districts. It's interesting. You can if you search the runes, find all kinds of stuff: inscriptions, valuables, bits of adventuring gear, and this is, for example, this table here is something that begins to really impress on this product. The amount of history behind the dungeon is really interesting. So when the people find one of these inscriptions, you can roll and see that it's a fragment of a picture face, and it lists, for example, Alexandros, servant of the mighty lord, who helped tame the great cavern and cultivate the spores. And then it is, for the GM specifically here, it has some notes on this sample inscription, where it says here, Alexandros is an otherwise forgotten agent of Tarmis, the great Thothian priest who brought the great cavern under Argothian control. So this is something that happened in the past. Here's some clues. Some interesting stuff. Also a little suggestion on where you can use these. For example, a bronze key, and it's unknown what it's for. Or, as a GM, you may choose that it may be the key for some doors from the 3rd level in room 175, 177, the Hermitite doors. So you can find a key here on the surface that is for a door somewhere on the 3rd level. From here it describes the actual adventuring encounter areas. So each of those little round tables has some tables to roll on to find what's actually in there. But what I find interesting is things like this. So if you go to Arden Vul AV 22, this is a sign of the broken hand. This is actually a tavern, an inn, not a tavern, that is just outside of the Rune City, just north of it. And it shows here all kinds of services, and also for these people the relations with other inhabitants of these runes. So there's a list here with 8 things that they might have a relationship with. For example, the beastmen, Cronus and Estelle, the innkeepers, they are neutral with regards to the beastmen. They know the beastmen must have a separate entrance to the hall. It says here exterior 12, but does not know where it is, nor have they yet attempted to locate it, since the beastmen have seemed honorable, lawful. The pair is content to watch them and on occasion trade with them. Here it shows a list of the permanent inhabitants, which is of course the 2 tavern keepers, but also their guards. All these locations have quite interesting descriptions. And then we get to some real dungeon delving. So location 15 on the Arden Vul map is the Pyramid of Thoth. And there's graffiti left by adventurers or maybe monsters. It gives the place a bit of feeling of history. Tower of Scrutiny, another location on top, and then here is the first real dungeon level. So let's read an entry that's not too long. For example, the closet. Let's read the closet. This room contains only the recent corpses of a halfling adventurer and a sturge. The halfling has been drained of blood. Her corpse still bears a usable but halfling-sized suit of leather armor, and a short sword and sling lie nearby. The corpse also carries a pouch with 10 iron spikes, a flask of oil, and a parchment note on which is inscribed the following in Argothian: Use the little pyramid to access the howling caves. Beware of the darkness. And it says GM note. This note refers to the Pyramid of the Venerable Age in Area 311, which offers one of the swiftest and easiest routes from level 3 to level 2. So just this entry, a random one that I picked. It has some loot, not very interesting loot. But there's this halfling that's just lying there dead, and then there's the really interesting part, for me at least, because I love these dungeons and the history. So there's a parchment here with written in a, I think it's an ancient language, like Argontian, I'm not sure. That's probably not the common language right now. So if the people, the party know this language, they can read this, or use imagining to read it. And then there's a little hint for them to use, which just makes dungeon delving a bit easier. So level 2 gets a bit bigger, and I'm just leaving to see if I see anything really interesting. So this looks interesting. What is that? So the Whispering Hall. This barrel-vaulted chamber boasts strangely acoustic and magical properties. So there's a 25% that the creature from the chasm is present here. Roll on chart 263A. There's also 25% chance that Umsko, the intelligence baboon, is present, although Umsko and a random encounter can be present at the same time. If Umsko is present, he is carrying his key to the door 262 on a chain and a string around his neck. This is also something. There are a lot of like crossways in a dungeon, like elevators and stuff, where you roll sometimes on tables and find certain other inhabitants of the dungeon. You really get the feeling that this dungeon is not just static. Many rooms are just static, but the factions, for example, they are moving around. They have missions, and you may, just rolling on these random encounter tables, find them doing stuff around the dungeon. I'm not sure who this baboon is, but it sounds interesting, I think. So I'm not sure when you get a whisper, but you roll on this whisper table, and for example you get an instant ancient whisper, which might be something like an antique whisper. I feel sorry when the tender bring the security baboons into the well of light. The poor things are terrified of the light as it floods through the mirrors. And then you have, who was it that actually spoke this this whisper? So an interesting room, right? There's a lot of whispers. Apparently those whispers echo around the chamber and come back many centuries later. I'm not sure, but it looks really interesting. So level 3, random encounters, access and egress. So how do you get in? How do you get out? Each one of these has a lot of exits and places, exits and entrances to other levels. So what I said in my other video, Mag Dungeon needs to be interconnected. It must have more than 10 levels, which this does, and all these levels are very, very much interconnected. It's non-linear because even as described in the introduction, even the first level, there's many suggestions for where to start. So if the start is not set, then the whole thing cannot be linear. Many random encounter tables, very interesting. And then the level key. Well, I think you get the idea. This is one of the drive-through things that's not very cool. So sometimes when you have some printed material, it doesn't quite work, which sucks if you pay quite a premium on these books, I think. Lots of tombs, really nice. So okay, this is an interesting page. So the Forum of Set, it's like a big trading area at the center of the dungeon, and there are laws. Everyone has to abide by the laws. There are inhabitants, and then there's visitors. So you roll on the visitors, and then maybe if you have a 19 or a 20 on the visitor table, you have some special visitors, which means it's some specific other NPCs or monsters from around the dungeon can be here, or they're emissaries, or emissaries from other places in the world. It really gives this a feeling of being alive, and not as static as some of the, I think, the worst mega dungeons. Okay, so let's take a look at the book 4, the appendices. It has a brief history, exterior adventure location. So maybe in this book it describes more of the exterior. I mean the valley itself, because it only did some suggestions in the first one, I thought. Actually, no, this is just 4. So let's look at some of these new things. Monsters. Okay, it's functional. There's not a lot of art that we can see right away. Some of these art is kind of basic. It's interesting, but we can also see that there's actually quite a lot of new monsters. So if you just want a little monster book, I'm now skipping more and more pages, you'll have quite a big list of monsters. So S, F, alright, new magical items, and actually a random treasure determination table. I love these. I've loved these since the 2nd edition Dungeon Master Guide tables. So yeah, a lot of new magical items. I also don't think, if I'm just looking at these Ring of Levitation, maybe, I don't think these are in the standard books. I've never played Osric, so what I probably should have said, this dungeon is for Osric. I've never played Osric, but I played a lot of 2nd edition D&D, and then if I would play this, I would probably play it in a 2nd edition rule set, which is quite easy to just... Okay, so here we have like laser cannons, and I'm just gonna go through them fast. This is the Arden Vul items. Some very specific items for this location. Flora, all kinds of interesting plants. Some new spells, maybe you'll find spell books with these spells in there. And this is really interesting for me, the books. So throughout the dungeon, you'll find books, and the whole list of the books with not the complete books, of course, but a description of what's in those books is listed here. For example, there's a book called Blood is the Key to All, and it says this unique and blasphemous work was considered the basic text for the principles of blood magic, that is, the way to use blood as a focus for spell casting. The sole known copy was held in the Imperial Academy before it was stolen by Sir Baktos Kalthetos, aka Kerabos Khan. He's one of the factions, I think. See SL 1225. So SL stands for sublevel, so some guy or faction on sublevel 12. The identity of the author is a minor mystery among the score or so mages who even know of the existence of this volume. All that they agree upon is that he lived prior to the War of the Sorthians and the Theosops. This doesn't mean anything to me, but if your players are playing through this campaign and you as DM running it, I guess this could be an interesting history to get to know through this kind of books and inscriptions and stuff like that. In fact, the author was Salor Key, and he's also in the dungeon on level 5, who retains the autographed manuscript in his sanctum. And then there's a couple of letters describing the book. So the A is the author, L is the language, T is the type, D is the dimensions, W is the weight, the material, the rarity, all this stuff. So this is material is tanned human skin. It's written in Mithric. It's a codex. It's rather unique, and the field of study is supernatural, unusual humankind. That's the worth, and where it can be found, actually in 2 places. which is strange for a unique book. So, okay, more of this. Some nice art. I think this is actually also in one of the other books. So a large list of books that can be found in the dungeon. Then there's a little section on the world. Now, if I would play this, this might be cool as like the backdrop, and knowing about the races that are there, the race of peoples, or maybe institutions, cultures and stuff like that, titles. That could be interesting, but it's not completely relevant for running the dungeon, I think. It's just, yeah, backdressing, basically. The languages. So that one book was written in Mithric, which was the original writing system of the Draconian Empire, apparently. Something about the gods, which has relevance. I think I've shown some entries that have relevant entries to this. There's a list of 12 gods, which look very familiar if you're familiar with the Egyptian pantheon, such as Isis, Anubis, Osiris. The 10, which is more like fantasy gods. The 17, I think those are the modern gods we worship now. I'm not sure exactly how much the time span is, but I think this should be probably looked upon like maybe 2,000 years, like the difference between us and the ancient Egyptians. Well, it's actually more like 3,000, unless you believe some of the more outlandish theories. So this is also interesting. There's a big list of NPC parties, and some of these parties are quite big. So this first party here, Dalton's Darlings, it's actually a party with 6 members, and apparently there are 10 different parties. They have different ethos, which is just alignment, and then they have different average levels, and they're also statted in different levels. So for example, the 5 Fingers of Destiny will be statted at 3rd, 6th and 9th level. I'll show you. Some of these are fixed as an encounter, always at these locations. Others are wandering NPC parties. They may also be found somewhere. So, Group 5, the Survivors of Stone. A list with the members of the party, a little description, who's the leader, what's their ethos, what is the goals, what are their motives. And then the low level versions, which are level 2, Fighter 2, Cleric 2, Thief 2. And then there's a mid-level version. These are 6th or 4th level characters. And then there's the Survivors of the Stone high level versions, and they are level 9 to 12 even for thieves, because thieves level faster. So lots of stat blocks for the NPC parties. And then the last thing I wanted to show is very interesting. If you ever see any reference to a character, usually there will be a little reference next to it on which level it can be found. But they also have here an index of all the proper names. So if you want to look up, for example, Heliobolus, well, you can see here is a spectre, and he's found on level 7 in room 56. Okay, Infinity, the years, how many it felt like it took to complete this work. Also see years, 11. So one author, 11 years of his work, and published, but for quite a high price. You can get a lot of really cool stuff for this amount of money, but I think if you have all those other things, if you have Slumbering Tsar, Rappanet Tuk, if you have or no interest in adventure paths, well, even the PDF for this is $100. So yeah, think about it, and I hope this helped. Thanks for looking, guys, and see you guys next time.